Okay, guys, so today you're going to be working on solving inequalities. And so I just want to go over a couple of things that we had gone over in class so that you can actually do the sheet that I want you to do. So when we look at one-step inequalities, that's pretty simple. We basically want to get the variable by itself, so we do the inverse operation. This x is not by itself on the other side of the inequality sign because the 3 is here. What is the opposite of adding 3? It is subtracting 3. So these cancel out, and then negative 7 minus 3. That's the same thing as negative 7 plus negative 3. And if you count 7, 8, 9, 10, so I bring down my variable, I bring down my sign, and the answer is x is less than negative 10. Okay? If we go down to number 3, the opposite of multiplication is division. This is going to be 4. And I'm going to divide by 4. So these cancel. That leaves h is less than 1/2. Okay? I think those are the basic ones that we know how to do. So we are going to go ahead and move on to using them with negatives. So when we're talking about negatives, if I divide by a negative or multiply by a negative, my inequality sign flips. So that's going to be divide by -4, divide by -4. That's going to cancel. G is, and the sign's going to flip, less than or equal to, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So -8 divided by -4 is positive 2. So the inequality sign flips because I'm dividing by the negative, and then a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay, same thing goes when we have the variable on the right side of the equation. When we have the variable on the right side of the equation, let's say here, number 2, we are going to do the inverse operation and divide by 4. Divide by actually -4 because we want to get that h by itself. Did I divide by a negative? Yes, I did. So my inequality sign flips. Then a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Okay, this is technically the right answer, but if we wanted to graph it, we would have to flip the whole inequality. Okay, so we know that these two are equivalent because the greater than is opening up to the -2 on both equations. So it's kind of like when you learn in elementary school, the alligator is eating the -2 in the first one, and it's also eating -2 in the second one. Okay, so we just did the inverse operations. If we go and look at the right side over here, we see that a fraction is being multiplied by a variable. So if I rewrote this, this would be, let's do number 2. 6 is greater than 1/2 d. And in class, we talked about how we can group the variable with the numerator. So if I were to change this and group the variable with a numerator, what is happening to the variable? It is being divided. So the inverse operation of dividing is multiplying. So what I do to one side, I do to the other. 2 times 6 is 12. 12 is greater than d. Okay? If we also wanted to look at the same problem, we could see that 6 is greater than 1/2 d. Since we are multiplying by a fraction, we can multiply by its reciprocal. The 2's will cancel out, the 1's will cancel out. That will leave the d sitting over there, the greater than sign, and then when I do to one side, I have to do to the other. And we get the exact same answer. Okay, now let's look at two-step inequalities. We did some of these in class. So let's go and look at number 5. Number 5. What is the inverse operation of subtracting 2? That would be adding 2. add 2 to both sides. Now, that is going to be negative b is greater than 10. But, question, is the variable by itself? No, it is not. It still has that negative in the front. So to cancel out that negative, that is just saying negative 1 times b. To cancel out multiplication, I'm going to have to divide by negative 1. Now they cancel. Divide by negative 1. So that is b is flip the sign, less than negative 10. Okay, do you see that the coefficient in front of the b is that imaginary negative 1? It shows the negative, but it doesn't show the 1. So if we say negative 1 times b, we know the inverse operation of multiplication is division. Therefore, we have to get rid of the negative by dividing by negative 1. Okay, and so that would flip our inequality sign, and a positive divided by a negative is a negative. Number 6, here's another example with the distributive property. Okay, negative 4 times 3 is negative 12. Negative 4 times n is negative 4n. Remember that the negative times a positive is a negative. And if we have a negative, it's going to overrule the plus sign. So that's the same thing as saying 2 plus negative 3, and that would be negative 1. That's the same thing as saying 2 minus 3 is negative 1, okay? Do you see how this equation, or yes, this equation we had a plus sign, and this equation we just had the subtraction sign? That's because this negative right here overruled and made the plus sign just a subtraction sign, and it makes our lives a lot easier. So when we distribute, that's going to be negative 12 minus 4n is greater than negative 32. Now this looks very similar to what we're used to, okay? Since this is a negative 12, what is the opposite of negative 12? The additive inverse of negative 12 is 12. We are trying to get 0, so that cancels. So now I'm going to add 12, okay? So now, in this case, we are basically saying negative 32 plus 12, okay? I know that we struggle a lot when we are using big negative numbers and we're trying to add positives, but think about it like this. 32 minus 12 is what? It's 20, and the bigger number right here is 32, so our answer has to be negative. So negative 20 is less than negative, don't forget that negative 4n. Now, I want to move over to the side because I ran out of room. So negative 4n is greater than negative 20. I have to get n by itself, so I'm going to divide by the negative 4. Divide by negative 4. Did I divide by a negative? Yes, my sign is going to flip. And a negative divided by a negative is a positive. So basically 20 divided by 4 is 5. Okay? If you need to, go back and watch it. So we started by doing the distributive property. We distributed both the 3 and the n. Okay? And we did not forget our negative right here. Right here, we cannot forget our negative. And when we divide by a negative, our sign flips. And a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Okay, let's move on to number 2 on the right side, because this is the first time we've seen something like this. I feel kind of confident that you can do the other 3 on this page. So let's do number 2. In class, I told you that we are usually going to remove the constant before we remove the coefficient. And that is whenever we do not have the whole problem being divided. So in number 2 on this right side over here, we have negative 2 being divided. I'm sorry, negative 9 plus a being divided by 15. That means the 15 is dividing the 9 and is also dividing the a. We cannot leave this 15 over here. So what I'm saying is I cannot just go ahead and add 9 because this right here isn't really 9. This is actually negative 9 over 15. Let me change this color. This is technically negative 9 over 15 plus a over 15. Okay? So if you were to just add the 9, that's not really a 9 sitting there. That is actually a negative 9/15. And that's just going to make our life very, very, very difficult. So if this fraction bar is dividing this whole expression up here, we are going to do the inverse operation. What's the opposite of dividing? That'd be multiplying. So in this case, we're going to multiply by 15. That cancels. Multiply by 15. Now I'm left with negative 9 plus a is greater than 15. Now it looks just like normal. So in this problem, we did the opposite of what we were doing in the other problems. In the other problems, we were subtracting and adding first and then removing the coefficient. This is an extra step. We have to remove the division because we have to then set the variable aside. So this problem is different than problem number 1. Okay, so let's finish this problem. The opposite of subtracting is adding. So when I add, that is going to be 24. So the inequality is a is greater than 24. This is completely different than problem number 1 over here. Let's look at problem number 1. This is 4 plus n divided by m is less than 6. In this problem, the 3 is only dividing the n. Do we have the 3 dividing the 4? No. Is this one big line going under the 4 plus n? No. We are only dividing the n by the 3. Therefore, I can go ahead and say, hey, I'm going to subtract 4, and that gives me times 2. So then I'm going to say times 3 times 3. That's going to be n is less than 6. So these two problems are different because in problem number 1, the n is being divided by the 3. In problem 2 over here, negative 9 plus a is all being divided by the 15. So those are two different problems. So if you need to go back and rewatch that, please do so. So now you should have your sheet of paper from the substitute, and you are to complete the worksheet. Once you complete the worksheet, there's another one on combining like terms and the distributive property. And when you're finished with everything, you may work on weekly review 16. If you do not have it, it's in Google Classroom. And very last thing, you may go and do an iReady lesson.